Just take a look at these two keyring spy cameras. Can you spot any difference between them? No, neither can I. However, there is one massive difference between the two cameras. The one in my left hand records at 740 by 480 resolution, and the one in my right hand records in high definition. And for a change, I don't mean the fake upscaled 1280 by 960 resolution that I encountered in other cameras like the Spy Pen, the car camera and the G200. No, this time round it's actually the genuine article. This camera records at 1280 by 720, that's 720p widescreen at 30 frames a second. Now I'll be showing you some test footage later in the video, so make sure you're watching this in HD. These keyring spy cameras are more commonly referred to as the 808 camera. At the time of filming there are at least 11 internally different but physically near identical versions of the 808. The version that I'm testing is known as the number 11, and it's the only one that records in true 720p HD. If you were searching for it on eBay, I suggest you search for HD key camera and look for the specs listing H264, number 11 or 1280 by 720, and expect to pay somewhere between £20 to £30 from a Hong Kong seller. Chuck Law's 808 website is the place to go if you want to find out absolutely everything about these cameras, and there's also a wealth of information on the rcgroups.com forums that answered all the questions that I had. I suggest you also have a look at the footage that some of the RC Groups chaps have shot with this camera attached to their radio-controlled aircraft. Now, while these cameras are being advertised as spy cameras, the average user has no intention of using them for spying. Due to the size and weight, people are actually attaching them to motorcycle helmets, their car, a homemade rocket, remote-controlled planes, helicopters. In fact, the options are endless. And now you can capture HD footage for under £30. They're a good alternative to cameras like the GoPro HD Hero or the Contour HD, which cost over 4 times as much. They're especially useful for using in situations where you think the camera stands a good chance of getting damaged or being broken. Losing a £25 camera, while not being ideal, also isn't the end of the world. This is going to be a bit of a long video, so I'll tell you what's coming up. First off, I'll show you what you get with the camera, and then I'll show you how you operate it, as well as using it as a webcam. Along the way there'll be some test footage, and finally I'll show you how to change the time and the date and reflash the firmware so that you can delete the time and the date entirely. You should expect your camera just to come inside a bubble pack envelope and not inside a box, and supplied with it will be of course the camera itself, a USB lead that's used for charging and data transfer, a piece of self-adhesive velcro and a 12 volt car power adapter with a USB lead on the end. And of course the instructions, which as usual aren't particularly brilliant. Often when you buy a number 11 camera you'll have the opportunity to get it bundled with a memory card. I'd recommend against this because you can't guarantee the quality of the card. I prefer to use my own, and for the purposes of this review I'll be using a Samsung Class 4 4GB card. This card's a microSD and the camera accepts microSD or SDHC formatted to FAT. You'll need a Class 4 or better card. The camera takes about an hour to charge via the USB port, and whilst it's charging this red light will be on. When the light goes off, the camera's finished charging. The recording time with a fully charged battery is approximately 40 minutes. Now 40 minutes of 720p HD video will use somewhere between 2 and 3 GB of storage, so the battery will run out before my 4GB card is full. If you want, you could use a 32GB SDHC card in there, but to me that seems like a bad idea, because I don't think I'd want to record 7 hours worth of HD video without once attaching the camera to my computer to see if anything that I recorded was any good. I'll just talk you around the camera itself. These two buttons at the back here are just for decoration. The front two are the ones that work, and we'll call that one the rear and that one the front button for future reference. There's an indicator light there which you've already seen in operation. Here's where the memory card goes in. It's on a spring-loaded mount, so you've got to watch you don't drop it, and it just slides in there. Now compared to the other camera that I had, it does protrude slightly from the side, as you can probably just make out here. Not a big deal, but I just thought I'd need to mention it to you all the same. And then on the side here is a little hole for a reset button, and there's the USB port there, there's a lens and a microphone hole next to it. The camera's a lot snappier in operation than the old 808. To turn it on, you tap the rear button here and the light flashes. It's now in standby in video mode. It will turn itself off after a minute if I don't do anything, but if we tap the top button here, it flashes quickly, and that means it's now recording video. And if we tap it again, it goes back into standby mode again. Now from here we can just tap it again and it's recording video as quickly as that, and tap again and it's back in standby. Now we'll switch over to photo mode. You tap the bottom one, it flashes once, and every time you tap the top button, it just flashes and takes a picture. And then tap the bottom one again, and as you can see we're back into video mode again by the way the light flashes. And then to switch it off completely, you just hold the rear button until the light goes out. According to the specifications, photos are being taken at a resolution of 2592 by 1944, which is 5 megapixel. But as this camera's only got a 1 megapixel sensor, there's some software trickery going on here. Now I've uploaded a full resolution gallery of photos taken with this camera to my website, if you want to have a closer look at them. One slightly annoying feature of these cameras is there's no way to tell whether they're recording or off. The only way to find out is to press a button. If you press the front button and the light comes on, it means it was recording and you've just put it into standby. And if you press it and nothing happens, it means the camera's off. Due to the file size limits of the FAT file system, the camera automatically saves and creates a new file every 20 minutes and there's a 4-second delay between each file. The camera doesn't do cycle recording. When the card is full, the camera saves the file and stops recording. The video files that the camera creates are H.264 MOV files. So just to clarify the difference, a genuine number 11 HD 808 camera will record video in 720p MOV format. If you get an HD 808 camera that records at 1280 by 960, it'll be recording AVI files and it'll be upscaling 640 by 480 resolution. So buyer beware. Now I can't recommend any particular seller. My camera was a spare camera sent to me by a friend of the site. All I can say is to be careful and try and do a bit of research on the seller that you're going to be buying it from. Right, so that's enough blabbing from me for a minute. I took my number 11 camera and my old number 3 camera, which records at 740 by 480, out and about around Manchester to take some test footage, so let's have a look at it. I think you'll agree that the footage is really very impressive for such a small camera. The colours are vibrant and the movement is very smooth. When you compare it to the old 808 camera, which was the best one available, it records in a much more jerky manner and the footage is very washed out. And you've probably noticed how much wider the lens is. If you look at this, you can see both pubs on the new camera, and yet on the old camera you can just see the middle of both of them. For over a year now, people have been asking me what the best mini camera is that they can get hold of, and I've always recommended the number 3 808 camera. Now there's been other cameras come along in the meantime, but they've never offered the same image quality. Well, from now on I'll be recommending that people get the number 11 808 camera instead. As you can see, the image quality is leaps and bounds ahead of the old number 3 camera. And it's not just the image quality that's a big improvement over the old 808 camera. The microphone sensitivity is a lot better as well, and I'll demonstrate that with a couple of clips.
Northern service from Newhill Central will now arrive at platform 3.
And finally, there's one other improvement. The camera's an awful lot better at coping with low light conditions, and I can demonstrate this here. Believe it or not, this is quite a low light condition on this platform waiting for the train to come in. So we'll just compare this footage with the same footage shot on the old number 3 camera. Quite a noticeable difference, I think you'll agree. Now there's one last bit of footage that I wanted to try out, and that was to try the camera in the car. It comes with a car power supply because unlike the older model, the number 11 can be powered and record at the same time, and this might be one of those occasions when a larger memory card would come in useful. But as I mentioned earlier on, this isn't a cycled recording camera, which means that when the card is full, it stops recording. Now I haven't got the camera mounted quite correctly, and of course if you're using the piece of Velcro that was supplied with it, you make sure that you stuck it onto your dashboard in exactly the right position. And you'll also notice that there's a bit of a buzz coming across on the speaker, and I think that's because the microphone was either vibrating or it didn't like the background noise of the car. But one thing I will say is that it gets a very good view of the road from left to right, which is something that the old camera didn't get and just tended to focus right in the middle of the bonnet. So just think, with a handful of these cameras you could try and make your own travelogue program like Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman's Long Way Down, or something like Top Gear for example. Now this camera will also function as a webcam, so I'll show you how you go about doing that. Well, first off you attach it to the computer using the USB lead, and now the tricky bit, you have to press the front button and hold it down, and then simultaneously press the rear button for a couple of seconds. The computer then recognises that you've attached a USB webcam and automatically starts installing the appropriate drivers. The camera doesn't come with a driver disc, but it doesn't need it because it installs automatically. And this worked on my Windows 7 machine, as well as on my old PC that runs Windows XP. Although I couldn't get it to run on my MacBook, which runs OS X Snow Leopard. Oh, and I should mention that the webcam runs at VGA resolution 640 by 480 rather than 720p. The most commonly asked question that I got about the previous 808 camera was how to set the time and date, so I'm going to explain how to do that with this camera. You have to create a file called timeset.txt, and you can do this in any word processor document like a TextEdit or Word or Write, and the file's going to look like this. It's just one line of text with the date and the time shown in this format, which I've blown up so that you can read it. The time and date that I'm setting here is the 18th of February 2011 at 9:54 PM. So once I've changed that information, I save the text file and then drag it onto the memory stick. Don't put it into any folders, just put it into the root of the memory stick. And then of course put the memory stick inside the camera. Now once the camera's switched on, it reads that file that I've created and changes the built-in time that's stored inside the camera's memory. And it erases the time.txt file as well. So next time you set the camera recording, it will show the correct time and date at the bottom right of the screen. Many people understandably don't want their footage to have a time and date stamp in the bottom corner. And on this camera there is actually a way to delete this, although doing so is not without some risk, and that's the reason that I left this to the very end of the video. It involves flashing some new firmware onto the camera, and the very early versions of the number 11 camera, from December 2010 or earlier, will be rendered permanently inoperative or bricked by attempting this procedure. It'll only work with newer models, and there's no way to tell the different versions of the camera apart. But since I got this camera in January, there's a good chance that this will work, so let's give it a go. It's a simple procedure, much the same as changing the time and the dates. You just have to find the relevant file in this folder here called Date Off, and it's a bin file, and then just drag that across to the memory card and again put that inside the camera. And this time you switch the camera on and you have to wait a few seconds while the flash memory gets updated. And if everything's perfect, when I switch it on again, I shouldn't get a time and date stamp at the bottom corner. And of course, using the other file that I had, which was time on, I could revert back to showing the time at the bottom corner again. However, you have just watched me brick my camera. That's right, I've completely knackered it. So it appears that I must have had an early version of the camera after all. So that's a bit annoying. Now, I was going to put the firmware up on my website, but after my rather unfortunate experience, I thought it's best not to, because I can't cope with all the heartbreak of all the different people telling me they brick their cameras too. But anyway, it's given me an excuse to open up the camera and show you what the insides look like. And I thought you might appreciate seeing the differences with the old number 3 808 camera that I've got, so I've opened up that one as well. Okay, finally, I think it's only fair to highlight some issues that people have reported with this camera, when it was working of course. When the battery goes flat, the camera doesn't shut down in a controlled manner, so will either erase or corrupt the file that's currently being recorded. Running it flat also seems to make the camera forget the time and date setting. And this is a bit of a weird one that was solved by people experimenting on the RC forums. If you want to charge and record at the same time whilst using a standard USB lead, you'll have to start the recording first before the USB lead is attached. And this is due to the weird way that they've wired the wires up in the USB socket, although the supplied car charger doesn't have this problem because it's got proprietary wiring in it. And some people have reported problems transferring files over USB, but I haven't experienced this problem because I always use a card reader anyway. This is probably stating the obvious, but with any cheap mass-produced Chinese electronic devices, there's always a chance of getting a camera that's dead on arrival. Some people have received cameras with out-of-focus or cross-threaded lenses, and these can sometimes be fixed with a steady hand and a pair of needle-nose pliers. So in summing up, it can't be understated, an HD camera this small for this price is a complete game changer. People can now put a decent HD quality camera pretty much anywhere, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what imaginative people do with this camera. Unfortunately, mine is now dead. It bravely sacrificed itself in the interests of science. However, I've already got a replacement on order from Hong Kong, and think I'm just going to leave the time and date alone on that one. So remember that you can see some photos that I took with this camera on my website, where you'll also find an example of a time-setting text file that you can download if you want. And special thanks to Anthony Green for sending me his own camera so I could make this video review. Thanks for watching.